Today is part of our series of interviews that we're having with local folks from the Concordia and Cloud County community for the Cloud County Historical Society Museum Archives. We are very pleased to have with us Ed Pick and his wife Marion, longtime members of the community, grew up in this area and then were away from here for a number of years and in their careers, and came back to the community again later, and going to visit with them today about their experiences over their lifetimes, their work with ham radio and how they got started with that, and also some of Ed's experiences in the corporate world working with computers for UNIVAC.
Good afternoon, Ed.
Well, good afternoon.
When were you first licensed? What year?
1949.
1949. That's a long time ago. What got you into radio? Why did you get interested in it?
Well, I was always interested in radio. Some of the neighbors had 2 meters regenerative receivers that they were using in an airplane to chase coyotes with, and I thought that was pretty neat. Having a radio in a airplane, and you could radio it back down to the ground, and they'd know where to go hunt for coyotes or rabbits. Or some of we used to have rabbit hunts, of course. So
Yeah.
that was an interest. But professionally, from being a licensed commercial operator, that's been our life most of the years. It's always had something to do with electronics.
So the electronics part was your life and ham radio was your hobby.
Yeah, I enjoyed both of them.
Okay, well that's good.
I've always liked what I did.
There's a lot of things to do in radio for a job. There's a lot of different jobs, or there was. Not as many now with electronic in, you just change out the part. I understand in some of your electronic career you worked on computers. Were they bigger than they are now?
Yeah, they fill up a whole room and had 60 ton of air conditioning just to keep it cool. But they were all vacuum tubes. There was not a solid state device. That was before transistors had been invented. Certainly no large scale integrated circuit. It was not software, it was hardware. So with lines and lines of vacuum tubes with the filament lines running 1 inch in diameter just to light the filaments. So it was a different world.
And you had to change the tubes out pretty often?
Well, they would last a couple of years, but then you had to go trace them down to see which one. Of course, like a regular radio, you look in and one of the lights isn't bright in the filaments, you probably got the problem solved.
Okay.
But the engineering part of it was the part that made our living, of course, is being a broadcast engineer. Because since we left the Hutchinson, Kansas area, we worked on a lot of stations around here, about every station in a 100-mile radius. I've worked,
Yes.
helped them get it going again and stuff like that. So back in the old tube days, they almost required you to have an engineer on site all the time. So it was a good way. If you had a radio telephone first class commercial license, you could get a job about anywhere.
Okay.
Because there's all kinds of businesses. The radio stations had to have commercial licensed engineer.
Yes.
So that was a lot of jobs.
Yes. Okay.
Every radio station had a job for you.
Okay. And you were doing that before you got your ham license?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you were in the service?
Air Force.
Air Force. Did you do something with radios in the Air Force?
Well, it was all radio. When I got out of basic, I got stationed on the flight line of one of the what do you call it? The flight lines on one of the air bases. And we used to go out and repair the radios that were in the P-51s and the jets, and so we got a chance to crawl over all the airplanes.
Okay.
And,
well, that was kind of interesting, I'll bet.
then after I got out, they sent me to Scott Air Force Base, and I did some teaching there with VHF equipment and stuff, because that was where I was going to be going, was to Alaska.
To Alaska. Okay.
That was when it was still a territory.
Okay.
Wasn't a state.
And you worked on the Dew line up there, did you, or was it there yet?
Most of my work was having to do with communications from the radar locations on the coast of Alaska back into the air base where they could take care of the problems that would arise on the radar. So it was a point-to-point communication, one place to the next, to get the signal right on back to the Air Force base so they could fly the jets or whatever they wanted to do.
Okay. Did you use ham radio while you were in Alaska?
Well, I built up some radio when we were stationed at a remote location, put it all together, and Marion, of course, had her license, so we made schedules mostly on 20 meters from Alaska to Kansas, and that was one of the joys of my life, is to turn on the radio and hear her on the
Marion, what was that like for you to hear your husband's voice from Alaska on the radio, little box in your
Well,
car?
I made a contact,
Yeah.
and with the help of the hams around the community, they were good at giving me help, and also with our REA, and he, and through my dad, they ended up, we purchased a great big electric pole so we could get our antenna up higher. And so that was the way we got to contact Alaska.
Okay.
We could see the handwriting on the wall was going to be that way, so we worked hard to get the equipment here and so that she could use it and make sure the license was, she got the license and all that. So the incentive was there to do all that, otherwise you may never get it all done.
Yeah. What was it like getting your license? Did you just go to some class here in town, spend a couple nights and go get your license, or how did you get it? How did you
You
study?
had to be in front of a federal inspector, and I had to go to Kansas City.
How long did you study before you went? Did you have electronic books or something you studied in?
Well, it wasn't electronic because I was already a licensed engineer, a commercial engineer, but I didn't know the code.
So you had to study the
So
code
I had
law.
to study the code.
And that's the Morse code.
That's the Morse code.
Okay. Marion, what was it like for you getting your license? Was it pretty hard to study kind of by yourself, maybe?
No, we studied in Glendale, Arizona,
Okay.
and I would get through my morning work and take time out and study. And pretty soon I knew that it was time to go to the inspector to take my test, and I passed it.
Uh-huh. Was
So
that in?
I like code, and I also like typewriting.
Oh, yeah. Well, they
So-
kind of go
and
hand in hand.
That you had to be accurate
Yeah.
and speed.
Yeah.
That was in the days where you had to do that, and then sometime for electric, we had an electric typewriter.
Yeah. Selectric, I think IBM called them.
Yes.
I know the typewriter and Morse code goes together because a lot of them, as they copied the Morse code, would type it on a typewriter because they could type faster than they could write. And a lot of the military did that, and some of the news bulletins that come through was run by typewriter. Code came to them, Morse code. They typed it out because it was quicker to write, and plus you could read it. You know, if you're trying to write too fast, sometimes if it gets old, nobody can read it, not even you. And they kind of want accuracy, so it came in that way.
Yeah. So we enjoyed that.
Okay. Ed, did you build your own antennas, or did you just order them out of Sears and Roebuck catalog, or what'd you do?
Well, we built most of them. The one that was there where Marion was using it here in Kansas was a commercial build antenna, high gain antenna, I believe it was. And then all the local hams gathered around one weekend and put it up and got it ready to go, because I was having trouble hearing her and she wasn't hearing me as well from Alaska, so having good antennas is a real break.
Was that a beam antenna?
It was a 3-element beam
3-element beam. And she would point that towards Alaska,
on it.
and it would help pick up
I
your
could
signal
hear
better, and you could hear her better.
Yeah, we had contacts a couple times a week as a rule, and then if the propagation was really bad, I would go through some guys in California. I could always get into California from Alaska. It seemed like the propagation skip was pretty good there.
Uh-huh.
And then they would hear her calling from the other end and say, she's on the other end.
Oh, that's neat.
So it was kind of a kind of pass the time, and it was good to be able to hear each other's voice over the radio for that far.
Ham radio creates a lot of friendship around the world, people you've never seen, doesn't it? You just hear the voice, you instantly know it.
Yeah, it's interesting that it doesn't matter what profession you're in. You can have doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs all together, and they all want to talk radio.
Yeah, it's true.
So you never met a stranger
Yeah.
in amateur radio. You get on and call for a general call, and somebody comes back maybe you've never met, but you get acquainted, and then maybe hold schedules or you hear him on again and go talk to them some other time. So it's a good communication device.
It's interesting to talk to somebody in different parts of the country or the world, because they always have something about their area or they've done or they're doing that's interesting. Either it's in radio, just their area, or something they're doing in radio that sparks your interest. And, hey, I think I'll try what they're doing, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
looks like fun, and they pick it up and become a licensed amateur too.
Yeah.
Doyle, it occurs to me that ham radio may have been kind of the original Facebook
It was. It was.
as far as getting out there and meeting people from around the world.
Yeah, it is. They, Marlon, one of the other local hams here, talked about he got on the international, the YL International Sideband System. And it's a group of hams that gather off and on during the day when they got time at a certain frequency. And it's on 20 meters a daytime. They have some 40 meters at night. And the minute you hear somebody's voice, you know who it is. And they mainly just chit-chat away about things. And then they do awards. If you talk to somebody in every state, you can be a married couple and be on. And they try to talk to them in every state or every country. And my wife used to do that a lot. And somebody could just come on and say hello, and she'd know their voice instantly. And that's Father, I can't remember the name now, in Christmas Island. Or that's,
Yeah.
you know, and I listened to Tom Christian on Pitcairn Island, which I see he passed away this summer, and his like third or fourth great granddad was the Mutiny on the Bounty Christian.
Okay.
So that was interesting. I used to listen to him a lot. I knew his voice instantly when I heard it.
Well, it's amazing. You can have maybe a dozen people check into a network that they're trying to check in, and you can recognize all the voices.
Yes. Is there anyone prominent that you've talked to, that like a king or a president or anyone you can think of? Did you ever talk to King Hussein of Jordan or anyone like that?
Yeah, I've worked him a time or two. I put up an antenna primarily for Europe, and it worked real good off in that direction, so you could hear Europe, but sometimes better than you could hear in the United States. If the band is open, you can work the world. If it isn't, you can't work anything.
Yes.
So you're a little bit dependent on some of the propagation depends on sunspot cycles that are been around for a long time. But back when we were licensed in 50, afterwards about 50, 55, something like that, there was real good propagation conditions come in. I was going to work out at KFRM one day out south of town, and I was on the radio and somebody called and wanted to know if I was going into the next county.
Yeah.
And it was a guy from Moscow calling, and he was a Russian.
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm not going out of the county. He said, okay, I'll let you go.
Yeah.
So he was collecting counties. I figured maybe I'd get to the next county, he could check that one off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
propagation, and that's from an automobile, you know,
Yeah.
driving down the road and hear a guy from Australia or New Zealand or South Africa, somewhere there. South Africans come in pretty strong.
That's kind of, you get on the radio and call CQ, which means, hey, I'm here, I want to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And you give your call, you never know who's going to answer you. And I think that's part of the excitement of ham radio, is just getting to meet new people. You don't know where they're from.
Yeah, that's the way it is. And
Yeah.
they're all make friends, seems like, once you find out maybe they're a high up in official in the government somewhere, or just working normal work, you know.
There's all works of life in ham radio. It's not.
Right, yeah.
So, have you built radios? Did you build any of your own radios?
All the first radios I built, the first 2 or 3, I suppose, maybe in the first 15 years. And then once the solid state stuff got going, that wasn't quite as much fun as the tubes, vacuum tubes, where you could get them to do things. But The old radios with vacuum tubes in it, they work just as well as the new solid-state integrated circuit radios. They're just a different radio. Back in those days, they were either transmitters or they were receivers, but they weren't both. You had a receiver you could listen on, you had a transmitter you could talk on. But until you put them together, you couldn't make contact.
Yes.
So now that the solid-state equipment is here and the integrated circuits are a lot smaller, they don't draw very much power. You don't have any vacuum tubes in it, so they work real well. A transceiver, transmitter and receiver. That's been quite a breakthrough, but that's only been in the last 20 years maybe, where you had transmitters and receivers all solid-state.
And to kind of put that into perspective, the earliest radios had some kind of vacuum tubes, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
And then the early televisions, of course, did
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
They were all, even the picture tube was a vacuum tube.
And then the later technology was integrated circuits or solid state.
Yeah, once the transistor was designed, they said it would never work on high frequencies, but they perfected it and got large-scale integrated circuits all on one piece of silicon, and it does just about everything. Almost a whole radio's on that one chip. So it's not like it used to be, where you had all tubes and all components. You could fix the components, but when an integrated circuit goes bad on you, there's not much you can fix in them. You almost have to replace them.
The tubes, you could see the lights didn't light, the filaments didn't light, and replace them. And these integrated circuits, some of them's got 20, 30,000 transistors in there, and the joke is you don't ever let the smoke out. If they smoke, and that's what they do, they go bad as a rule, the case will crack and they'll let out a little puff of smoke and they're done. They always say, if you let the smoke out, they're done.
Yeah, that's right.
It's kind of what it is.
Well, vacuums didn't smoke, but they used a lot of current just to light the filaments in them.
Yeah.
More energy was used to light filaments than it was to power the whole transistor radio.
Oh, yes. Are you glad you got in-ham radio?
Oh yeah. It's been a hobby all my life. Of course, a hobby and a profession, so when you have them both together, it seems like you learn things and you do things that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, because they both reflect each other.
And things in your work you could go home and experiment with at home, because ham radio is an experimenter's hobby. So you could experiment and see why this failed, why it didn't work, or a bigger choke or something,
Oh, yeah.
more filaments or something in there would make it work better maybe,
That's right.
or learn about the circuit.
Well, the times have changed, and of course the vacuum tube computers were so big and so clumsy, and they were a lot slower. The clock speed on some of those first computers were 200 kilocycles. So, and now we're talking about gigabytes, the speed of the crystals and the timing in them. So it's been a revolution in computers too.
Yes. And nowadays the computers, you can carry them under your arm or in a case,
Oh, yeah.
but you can also tie them to ham radio, can't you?
Yeah, you can. In fact, a lot of the ham radios have computers in them, and that's what they're running off, is software programs that the computer interprets to put it on, make it run do whatever you want it to do.
Yes. How did you keep up with the technology over the years, how it's changed?
Well, you have to stay with it if that's part of the business. When you get in a different business, as far as electronics, it generally opens up another field. So, but it's all related. If you understand the electronics part of it, it all comes together at the end, seems like.
Ohm's law and some of those is still the same, isn't it?
Yeah, the fundamentals haven't changed. Propagation, of course, is different every day depending upon propagation. But the technology is it's just remarkable how it's expanded from the old spark days where there weren't even vacuum tubes, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So, and most of that's happened during our lifetime, you know, from the early 40s, 20s. I was born in 29, and I'm sure they were invented at that time. So there's a lot of history that has changed. Most of it, I suppose, is for the better.
Yeah.
But that used to be a job of fixing things, and now that you don't fix, you replace. So the technology isn't maybe quite as important as it used to be.
Yes.
Ed, what was your earliest memory of hearing a radio of any kind?
Well, probably when I was raised on a farm with milk cows and we had a radio in the barn.
Yep.
Of course, that was an AM radio. It had the antenna strung over the bales of hay so it would pick it up. And you could hear all the news and everything while you were milking the cows.
You
Turn the
know,
radio on and the cows were ready to go.
yeah, that's right. Turn it on. They waited at the door, wouldn't they, to come in to be milked?
Sounded like they wanted to hear the news too.
Yeah, they wanted to.
Yeah. And if it wasn't coming in, you'd go move the antenna a little bit or try to raise it or do something a little different because you wanted to listen to that certain radio program that night. You used to have a lot of programs on the radio you listened
yeah.
to.
Yeah, it's a different world now.
Yeah.
What were some of your favorite radio programs, you and Marion?
Well, when I was a kid, it was Jack Armstrong and Captain Midnight and some of those.
Yeah.
How about you, Marion? Some of your favorite radio shows when you were young?
Do I say Amos and Andy?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Everyone.
what was the one in the closet? I forget the names.
Fibber McGee.
Yeah, Fibber McGee and Molly.
Yeah.
So,
Shows like The Shadow and different ones like that.
but you were required to take care of your chores before you could sit down to listen.
You didn't get to take your iPod with you and listen to it all the time them days, did you? Yeah.
And then there's music too, to listen to pretty music.
Mhm.
So, and even now, we listen to things in KMOX in St. Louis here. If you're awake at 5 in the morning or 5:30, you can tune in to St. Louis and listen to their program. That was
When you got
music.
kids living in St. Louis, well, you kind of like to check up on the weather for them.
Yeah, that's
So you
true.
listen to the radio station when the sun starts coming up, then the skip propagation fades away and then you can't get them.
Uh-huh.
But they're on all night and all day. You just can't hear them in the daytime.
Why? What's the scientific explanation for that? Why is the nighttime better than the daytime?
Well, some frequency it is and some frequency it isn't, so that's not always. But on the broadcast band, that's pretty prevalent.
Okay.
If you get up into the shortwave band, some of them close dead at night. You can't hear a thing.
Why is that? I think he's asking. What's the...
Well, that's the way the good Lord made the propagation, I guess, because you can't change it.
In the daytime, the AM, the atmospheric absorption just sucks up the signal.
Yeah, it never
It
comes
doesn't
back.
reflect it back to you, doesn't it? Just lets it go into space.
Yeah, if the ionosphere gets heavy enough, when the signal hits it, it'll bounce off of it, come back to the ground. Maybe you'll get 2 or 3 bounces getting to where you're at, but that'll change. And if there isn't any skip, you don't get any bounces, of course. So then it's a ground wave. You have to almost be line of sight to make them work.
You can kind of think of skipping a rock across the pond, how it jumps.
Yeah.
So the signal goes up, comes back down to earth, goes back up. Sometimes you throw a rock and it just sinks. It don't bounce. That's kind of the way that works. So,
Well, there's a lot of interesting studies that you can get into, and propagation is one of them, where you can work propagation, and if it isn't there, but if you're looking for a particular country to try to chalk off another country, it's wise to check the propagation in that area so you know when it's going to be possible to get it. Otherwise, your signal's going to go somewhere else.
So propagation is basically how the signal is distributed out.
Well, what it hits, and generally what it hits an ionic layer that's ionized and then reflects back down, almost like a mirror.
Okay.
So it depends on how high the mirror is and how low the mirror is and what it's made of. There's about 5 or 6, maybe 10 different propagation modes that work on certain frequencies, and other frequencies they don't work.
and that's mostly controlled by the sun, isn't it?
A lot of it's, yeah, most of it is. Yeah, the sun changes a lot of things. As a computer engineer, keeping computers, in fact, I went to Minneapolis, Minnesota while they were developing Serial 1 and Serial 2. And I took Serial 2 after we got it fixed and running. I brought it down to St. Louis, and that's what took us to St. Louis, was Serial 2 computer of the UNIVAC file computer.
Okay, explain the significance of Serial 1 and Serial 2.
Well, the first one was a prototype, and that was the one that they learned how to build, and the second one was sort of fashioned at it, but had a few modifications in it.
So some of the very earliest
Oh, yeah, they-
commercial computers.
Yeah. Well, this would have been in the 50s. So you can imagine how many computers there were. In fact, when I went to work for Univac, I wondered what a computer was.
Yeah.
So you basically were competing with, say, IBM and in the development of
Yeah, but
computers.
Univac was competing with IBM and National and RCA, and you can go right down the list. They all had computers. They didn't last long, though. You had a computer, and if it stayed there for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and the new models come out, which were faster and had more flexibility, they were programmed different. They went from a hardware system, which was patch panel, where you had to punch patches in to make it work, to software where it was done with a language, and that of course changed computers around completely. But you could use the same computer on a half a dozen different applications that way. Just change the program and you're in a different world.
How big were those early computers you were working on? How much space did they take?
Well, you couldn't got it in this room. It was probably well, it took 50 or 60
Tons.
60 tons of air conditioning to keep them cool. And of course, vacuum tubes get hot. They got filaments in them, so they radiate a lot of heat. And that's not good for the rest of the components in it. But they were huge. They would fill up a whole room. Aeronautical Chart and Information Center had one that published our charts for flying charts. ACIC. Aeronautical Chart and Information Center. They had one of the other computers that we brought to St. Louis that I got a chance to work with, whatever. Sometimes you find things that are errors and you think, well, that can't be any other way. It's got to do that. So you call into the factory and say, hey, I found something you better look at and tell me what you want to change. And I tell them where the problem was, and they'd come back in a day or two or a week and say, here, you can put this change in, it'll solve your problem. So
Pretty
it's an
good.
interesting time.
You were a pilot also, right?
Well, I wasn't when I was in the service. I flew a lot of L-20 Beaver airplanes when I went from one remote location to the other, so I had a lot of flying. But I wasn't licensed then. I didn't get licensed until we moved back here.
You had your own private plane, right?
Yeah, we
Did
flew.
you ever take ham radio up in your plane?
Oh, a lot. I put a special antenna on the bottom of the belly that worked 2 meters. And I used to work the guy 100. You announce yourself at your aeronautical mobile, and the band just widens. You wondered how many people were listening to you, all wanting to make contact with an aeronautical mobile.
Yes. You said some of your early days of radio was listening to the coyote hunters go out and hunt coyotes and talk
Yeah.
back and things. How did that make you feel when you was actually up there, the one talking on the radio in the plane? Did it bring back any memories of that?
But probably not, because they changed the laws that you're not supposed to hunt on a vehicle, which includes airplanes. So even spotting fish, things like that, if you're in the coast somewhere, they don't want you to fly out over the coast and say, there's a big tuna, go get him, you have to.
Yeah, but when you was up there, did it bring back memories of you hearing the coyote hunters up there
Yeah,
talking from the plane, and there
yeah.
you were doing it, even though you weren't coyote hunting, but
Yeah, one of those guys is on that picture over there that built up some 2-meter super regenerative receivers, and they were not very sophisticated, but from the airplane, which is a mile or two away, you could make communications pretty well.
uh-huh.
But the early computers were energy hogs. I mean, they really took a lot of energy to make them work, keep them lit.
We want to thank Ed and Marion for sharing their story with us today, and we're very appreciative of their contributions to Cloud County, Kansas. So thank you very much.
Well, I was born and raised here. I live in the same township that I was born in. Is that a record?
Well, you've got it so far. I'm still living in the same one. Yeah. Yeah, I think it probably is.
Okay.